Welcome to the Leave No Doubt podcast. I'd like to start off by thanking our sponsors once again, Connection Technologies, specialists in telecom and IT services. So once again, really do encourage you to check them out. Really excited today to be joined by Ben Young, current Inter Miami head of strength and conditioning, previously worked as a physical performance coach with the English FA. So loads of experience for us. Welcome, Ben.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Dan. Glad to be here, and hopefully looking forward to giving some insights people can take away.
Great to have you on. Great to have you on. Yeah, for those of you listening, I know this is a football podcast, so bear with me with this one here. But you started out working in Premiership rugby at the current champions Saracens. I think they won when you were there as well. So a top rugby team. Can you share with us any insights into what rugby training looks like, and just probably from the lens of what footballers can learn from the sport?
Yeah. I mean that's rewinding probably 15 or 16 years ago now, so I'm going to cast my mind back. But yeah, I was lucky enough to sort of slot straight from university straight into Saracens, which was going through a transitional period at the time, and going from sort of the mid to lower end of the table. And found themselves at the top of the table repeatedly, and have sort of done that consistently for the last decade now, nearly. It was a massive transition going from rugby into football. I suppose you can only reflect once you're back into the new environment. So looking backwards, what the differences were, and I suppose one of the main things that I feel like I was gifted going into Saracens was this idea of player ownership. So because the game of rugby is so much more reliant on a culture around like physical training and conditioning, the strength and conditioning coaches, the physical coaches, become almost like the right-hand man of the manager, and it's and in some cases it's as important, and in some cases more important, to make sure that the team are physically ready to compete. So the lads, and with that, the lads are completely bought in because they recognise the value of all of the physical training, which I think can be lacking in some environments or situations, or in particular players in football. Whilst it can still be really, really important, and we'll, as physical trainers ourselves, like we see the value in it, but it's not always there inherently in every single player. So I think the player ownership around their bodies, how to prepare, how to recover, how to look after themselves to make sure they're physically ready to compete every single week. I think that's probably the biggest difference, because I was gifted that ownership in rugby, and then sometimes can be the opposite in football, where you're convincing players and managers and coaches of the importance of different pieces of the physical part of the game. That's probably the biggest difference.
I guess you kicked us off there with a really important take home for anyone wanting to aspire to be elite players in any sport, is around that ownership. And we've spoken about on this podcast before around learning your body, taking control of your program, not being reliant on others. And I guess that's why it's called the Leave No Doubt podcast, is that's what we're trying to encourage everyone to aspire to do, and educate people to do that as well. You mentioned there Saracens, that rugby team that they progressed to, and for the last 10 years or last decade have been at the top of their game. We've spoken about cultures before. What was the culture kind of like there during your time?
Yeah, I'm so thankful that I experienced that culture, because it's still the kind of North Star of all of the cultures that I've experienced since. It's the thing that I always still try and influence towards in the other teams that I've been involved in, because it was so good. And I suppose if you could simplify it in like a sentence, it would just be work hard and play hard. They enjoyed unbelievable, and making memories was one of the kind of mantras. They enjoyed unbelievable periods off the pitch, but they knew as soon it sounds really cliche, but every time they crossed the white line, whether it's a training session or a game, all the lads would turn up and work unbelievably hard for each other and themselves. That's probably like a summary of the culture there.
And you see things in the news around them going on trips in the middle of the season, right? Going into big games and kind of bringing the players together.
Yeah, yeah. There's. I mean, yeah. Me and you both got stories of this, but yeah, there's stories of us in a European semi-final. So it's the same as the Champions League semi-final, and 4 or 5 days before, the lads are all out in Munich at Oktoberfest and getting stuck into a whole bunch of beers, but it being completely accepted, completely part of the culture that they knew that when they had that 4 day, 5 day building into the game when they got home that everyone would turn up, dig in, and and make sure they continue to win because it allowed them to go back out on these trips again.
But I guess that just shows the value, that team, the rugby or Saracens that put on that team culture, that team bonding, that togetherness. We spoke to Lee Mansell recently, and he spoke about the successful teams that he was and ones that won promotion being actually in that team environment for players being as strong. And that was probably as much of their promotion as anything else. So I think, if you're a player working in a team, and it just shows the importance of the team of football, and working with your players, getting to know them, and why that's so important. So
Yeah.
you made a massive jump. Sorry, so yeah.
No, I was just going to say like it's all about the team, but then there's and I suppose this is one of the other differences is like there's a selfishness around there was a selfishness around each of the players. And it's probably one of the main attributes I've seen in the top players I've worked in throughout England and now here even in the MLS is they're like almost laser focused on the one or two things that they can improve, and that will change and evolve as the season goes through and as they reassess their strengths, their development areas, and all of that. But I'd say every single player, as well as being a really close knit team, they were all on their own little individual mission and laser focused and knowed exactly what it was. And that's probably again one of the biggest differences I've seen between football and rugby is that they're really, really clear and willing to. It's easy to say you want to improve on everything, but it's actually quite hard to go through that mental kind of model or thought process of narrowing down to like, okay, no, I can only improve one or two things at a time, and what are those one or two that are going to have a real clear impact on the game every single week. And I'd say that's the thing that they did unbelievably well as well, which is, sometimes we call it the brilliant basics, but that is almost like the epiphany of brilliant basics. It's knowing exactly what you need to work on and having a plan about how you're going to do it and then executing it every day. So that's something I think if we're talking to the players in this podcast, that's something I'd really try and encourage players to think about. Really assess their game, understand exactly what they want to improve, realize they can't improve everything, and then think from a physical perspective, think about their super strengths or their development area. So what's the thing that's getting you selected every week? What's the thing that could limit you getting selected? And then making sure you're working on those two things and you won't go too far wrong. And from a physical standpoint, it's knowing what are the physical qualities that underpin that thing that you're really good at or the thing that you're not so good at and getting stuck into that. And I think from a motivation standpoint with players, that can really help as well, because then you realize that when you're in the gym or you're doing conditioning sessions or anything that's outside of the ball at your feet, you're still really motivated to do it because you can see you can see the complete direct line from what you're doing there in terms of a running session and how it's going to correlate into your week on week like performance. So yeah, that's probably just a waffle. That's probably another big difference. It's that team culture, but also the individuality and real clear direction about a focus when you're training.
I know that's really valuable advice, and I think we could stop the podcast here right now, and I think someone would have taken really good information away with them there around being laser focused, knowing what your goals are, and then really narrowing down on what those goals are and what they look like and why you do things on the day to day basis that are supporting you, like you said, either making you what gets you on the pitch, and what's going to prevent you from staying on the pitch, I guess.
Yeah.
So moving from, you took a massive jump from working at Saracens, you moved to the English FA, and started working with the Lionesses. When you moved to the Lionesses, What was women's football like back then? I say back then, it wasn't too long ago, but what was it like when you joined?
Yeah. Well, yeah, it is back then because it's gone through like a whole nother evolution, really. I'm trying to think when it was. It was 2014, I think. I started in football with the Lionesses. Um, yeah, they were 13th in the world over like the 4 or 5 years I was with them. We got to third. We made three semi-finals. Um, but yeah, it was a different beast. It was I remember, yeah, I remember clearly like going around the different clubs, um, and at Cobham at Chelsea's training grounds, you'd drive past the huge first team um, training centre on your left. There'd be the boys' academy, which is basically a replica of the men's first team on the right. You'd drive past 16 pitches, and at the back would be, a wooden shed and a couple of pitches for the girls. It was definitely, you sensed it was an afterthought all the time. As much as the narrative around it was that they were starting to invest heavily, starting to invest. That's probably the best way of looking at it. But the reality was it was just starting to gain momentum. So yeah, it was definitely a different time.
And obviously going into it from your lens as a strength and conditioning coach, what was the gaps that you saw important to start working on straight away with the players?
Yeah, it was interesting because it was almost like, and again, I'm trying to cast my mind back here. Um, there was, I think, one of the first thing was almost like the first job was almost eradicating myths and norms that had found their way into the game, begged, borrowed, stealed from boys' teams, from men's teams, people trying to replicate what was going on in the men's game into the women's game, and a bit like Chinese whispers. This is how I kind of felt. It was like those stories, those anecdotes, those ways of working would sort of make their way to the women's team, and you'd be looking at it going like is this optimal? Is this the best? But the players having quite strong beliefs about certain things. So I really remember that recovery was like almost like the most important part of the physical like practitioner when coming into the team. And I remember speaking to the manager at the time, Mark Sampson, going, "We're not training hard enough to warrant recovery. Don't worry about the arse baths after training. We need to get some work in on the grass and make sure it's connected to how we want to play. Make sure it when we're training, it's starting to exceed demands of the game. When the match play, all of those sort of things. When they're in the weight room, it needs to be connected to the field, etc., etc. So." Yeah, I remember there was a lot of myths and misconceptions around things like that. I think that's a good example. Um, so I remember actually before the 2017 Euros, we had a nice big long preparation period going into the tournament. I think it was like 6 weeks or 7 weeks, like unheard of in the men's game. You only get 1 or 2 weeks if you like. Well, yeah, 1 week, maybe less than that, before a major tournament on the men's side. But in the women's side, you're gifted big chunks of time before a tournament on the most part. I think we had 6 or 7 weeks. And I remember I banned part of this narrative was, yeah, removing the reliance of recovery to allow physical adaptation. So in the first chunk of the preparation period, I didn't ban it. If a player really wanted to do stuff, then they do it. But yeah, there was no recovery put on after any sessions for the first 3 or 4 weeks of camp to allow for physical stimulus and physical natural adaptation. So things like that. That was some of the big rocks.
Welcome to the Leave No Doubt podcast. I'm so excited to welcome our new sponsors, Connection Technologies, a market leader in business-to-business tools ranging from business mobile, hosted telephony, and fixed line services. Head over to their website at www.connection-technologies.co.uk, fill in their inquiry web form and find out how Connection Technologies can support your business moving forward.
That's really interesting, and it's one of those that you got to ensure that you are keeping an open mindset. You're educating yourself, you're speaking things, and always learning. I think is important for players, rather than if you always do what you've always done, or you've always done what people always have or copied other people. You might not always be getting it right for yourself. You touched on there. I thought was really interesting. Um, around recovery specifically, and you mentioned how it might not always be appropriate to do recovery. Can you kind of like expand on that a little bit more?
Yeah, so if you think of ice baths as an example, which is a go-to and one of my favourite modalities, by the way, the whole point of an ice bath is to reduce blood flow, is to minimise inflammation from a stress. So your most stressful period would probably going to be a game within the week. So immediately after the game, jumping in the ice bath to reduce the inflammation, reduce blood flow, to allow yourself to then train better, like the following day or within a couple of days. That's the kind of concept of an ice bath. But yeah, so that sort of anecdote I told there, we wanted the players to actually go through adapting to that big stimulus. So whether it's the hardest training session or the hardest weight session, when you're breaking down those muscle fibers and the muscle belly's becoming inflamed, and inflammation starting to build, that's part of the recovery process, the natural recovery process, to get stronger, fitter, and all of that sort of stuff. So yeah, you want to. There's periods of your training or your games, your seasons, that you actually want to naturally recover to allow yourself to get that like super compensation effect, that taking yourself from A to B, like actually getting stronger and adapting to a stimulus. So I think, yeah, again, lesson for anyone listening really is start looking at your seasons and the periods where maybe you want to actually adapt to the stress, versus recover from the stress. If you're playing, I don't know, to talk about a tournament, 7 games in 21 days, constantly games, you're going to need to throw all of the recovery modalities at yourself to be able to bounce back, to be able to perform between those really hard periods. But conversely, if maybe it's the early part of pre-season, but the whole thing's about getting physically stronger, more robust, all of that sort of stuff, I'd probably looking at the start of a pre-season and go like, okay, let's stay away from recovery modalities, because later in the season they're going to be really, really important for us, and we don't want to reduce the effects then when they're going to be so important, and we also want to make sure we're adapting to the current stimulus that we've got going on. That kind of makes sense.
Yeah, that makes loads of sense. Yeah, and I guess really interesting for a lot of people out there. And you mentioned before around like training intensity. How important to you is it to ensure that players are training at the right intensity within their training sessions?
Yeah, and that probably comes back to one of those the myths or the misconceptions, or just a way of working that was happening that I saw in the women's game when I came into it was, they play at one level, which was high, really high, but then we train the majority of our time. Like if you were to put it into a pie chart, the majority of our time would be spent tactically, setting up, a whole bunch of tactical work. And if it was technical, then it would be more like individual and less physical. So yeah, I think it's really important to think about the exact actions you're doing in a game. There's generally a tendency to always bring the pitch in quite small as well in football, from what I've seen. Not so much now at the moment, which is really nice. But start thinking about, again, that whole idea of being selfish, but start thinking about what your training looks like every single day versus what you actually get asked to do when you go out on the pitch. If you're a fullback and your training isn't looking like those big long fullback runs, and you're not doing a whole bunch of transitions and all that stuff, then there's a gap there. So I think, and they're the bits that we want to make sure we're filling, so we're preparing for the game. There's I've nicked it from a lot of different people, but there was a phrase we used to use called, I think it was from the Marines initially, but I nicked it from someone else. It was train hard, fight easy. So at some period during the week, we want to make sure we're training really, really hard, to allow us to fight easy on the weekend. I think going above and beyond the demands of the game in training is really, really important. And then there's another piece there, which is probably more for the coach, like the coaching side of things, is at some point, I think once you've got your tactics in place, and you set the team up how you want them to play, for me, even if it's for a small block of 5 or 10 minutes, we need to put it into action at game speed, for that real like cognitive learning standpoint. So look, it's probably out of the control for the players to be able to like do some of this stuff, because it's going to be reliant on more of the coaches. But that's maybe one almost for the coaches. It's like, yeah, how often is your training looking exactly like the game, or stretching the players beyond that of the game?
But I guess that probably is something for players to be aware of as well, isn't it? You know, when a coach is putting on a really hard training session, you're going, well, I don't really fancy this today. But actually, you know, the benefit they're getting from that on that day is going to put them in a better place for the weekend, versus the player who goes, oh, I'm going to take it easy in training today, so I say stay fresher. There's always that term, I'm going to stay fresher for the weekend. It's actually, you're probably doing yourself a disservice, one, physically, because you're not improving yourself and getting yourself ready, but also from, you know, that ability to put into practice what you're going to do on the weekend. You're not practicing it in the week at the intensities that you need to.
Yeah, 100%. There's a couple of bits in that. I think if you're a really experienced player, and you've gone, you talked about it at the start there, you've been really open-minded with who you've listened to, what you absorbed. I think I always think that players know their bodies themselves. That doesn't mean that like an under 14, 15, 16 knows that at that point, but by the time you're getting into your late 20s and 30s, if you've been open-minded to everything you've experienced, and everything you've been told like through that period, hopefully you're starting to know your body really, really well. And then, yeah, being conscious of, okay, what is my whole week looking like? And then in that, if you're a player that you feel like you do need to manage yourself at points, it's being tactical when you do that. So you know that on a Tuesday, okay, they like to push it particularly hard in this area, but I know that if I go hard on the Tuesday, then I'm going to struggle on the Thursday, which I then have a knock on the Saturday, whatever. It's basically about being like really conscious about what you're doing and what you need, but at the same time being really open-minded to accept new ways of working, and then taking taking those bits of information with you. I suppose the message there is about being open-minded, but at the same time trying to learn your body and still being selfish, if that makes sense.
No, 100%. And I think it's those players that, you know, can learn their body, or, you know, get their routines or early, are the ones, you know, who seem to be able to kick on. So during that time, and during your time with the Lionesses, obviously, the World Cup and just reached the final recently, and you would have worked a lot of those players. What sort of characteristics were you seeing, you know, in elite women's football, you know, that actually helps them become successful?
Yeah, I think the characteristics of a top player is probably consistent. I think that's I don't think that's got a significant difference with whether it's men's or women's. So if I think about just some of the ones that pop to mind, obviously technically, and that's number one, like technical prowess, and in that ability to recognize what is their super strength, what is their area they need to work on, and then going hard on that. Like the top players I see do come into training early, do leave the training ground late. It's the kind of cliche stuff, but at the same time they're focused on what they're working on. It's not just playing on the tech ball table, or you know, just doing some two touch with their mates. It's like, no, they've grabbed the coach and they're working on like an individual quality or attribute. So whether you call that technical quality or whether you call that like a mindset, it's probably, it's one of those things, isn't it? I think, mentality is definitely one of them. Consistency, discipline, all of that sort of stuff. Like, it's glamorous to be an elite athlete and a football. I keep wanting to say soccer, man. I'm having to bite my tongue every time I say football. I keep going soccer. It's glamorous to be a football player, but really the day in, day out is actually pretty boring. You have to train, you have to eat well, which sometimes means bland. You have to eat similar things, you have to sleep at similar times, you have to do recovery modalities, you have to go and train, you have to go in the gym, and then you have to make sure you're fresh, ready just to do it again the next day. And it's 6, sometimes 7 days a week. So like consistency and discipline, whilst being like laser focused, that like they are the things for me that define those top players. I think there's other stuff around, that bit that we've already talked around, like knowing their body. So staying on the grass, being robust is the best thing that you can do. So even if your physical program is aligned just to robustness and keeping yourself on the grass, that's probably one of the best things that you can do. Just staying injury free. The top players are naturally at the top because they play well consistently, and they're on the grass a lot. Otherwise, you don't become a top player. We all know of players that could have been top players and high potential. And I've got a few just going around in my head there, some high potential players, but they're always injured, and we all know who the top ones of those are. They were potentially a good player, potentially a top player, but they weren't a top player, So staying on the grass, and that's probably the main one. So they're all kind of wrapped up in the same sort of thing. This mentality, discipline, consistency. That's probably it. It's all the boring stuff that everyone doesn't want to hear.
And it's hard work, right? To do all of that, it's a big commitment, and I think we always look at elite players and we think they've got everything, but to get there, you can't shy away from it's going to be hard. You're going to have to make sacrifices, and I guess that's probably a big part of this podcast is just helping people to understand how they can benefit, but obviously showing it's not going to be easy to do it.
Mate, the hard work now, and this is probably my bad because I've been spoiled at working at this level. The hard work is almost like non-negotiable. That's the bit that just sits underneath all of it. Purposeful practice, you know what I mean? When you're spending all the hours on the grass or in the gym or whatever you're doing, the hard work's a given at this level. So it's like you're not gonna succeed if you don't have the hard work. And I suppose just while I'm looking at the pitches here in Florida, I'm just thinking about, so there's lads a few times this year. Hopefully this isn't sensitive information, but that have passed out in training because of the heat and the humidity. It's it can be 35, 37 degrees here, like 100 and 100 plus Fahrenheit, 100% humidity, and there's lads on the pitch. We've had a few occasions of that. So the hard work's a given. You know what I mean? They're not walking off the pitch and waving their arm, going like I can't carry on. They carry on the session and they hit the deck. It's crazy.
So you touched on there, part of a successful team that made it to, was it 2 or was it 3 semi-finals? 3 semi-finals?
Two semi-finals and then the bronze at the World Cup. So that was the 3rd and 4th playoff.
What does tournament, for those of you who might not know, what does tournament football look like? We all know it's a lot of games, but what is tournament football?
Yeah, well, yeah. You think you said it. A lot of games. It's relentless. It's relentless. It's unbelievable because you're traveling and you're playing games and there's hype and there's attention and there's energy and all that stuff. But it's a long time. I remember we looked into the demands of the game at the FA to see what the differences were like at the Premier League. This is on the men's side, Premier League versus tournament football. And they equated it to, so unless you're playing in the top 6 in the Premier League, it doesn't equate to international football. So it's basically going through that fixture period in Christmas, the Christmas fixture period, Saturday or Sunday, Tuesday, Wednesday, 2 games a week, but with all the games getting progressively harder, obviously with the addition of extra time and post the 3rd game, knockout, everything on the line, or you literally go home the next day. So it's hard to explain, but it's yeah, it's all, yeah, the fit survive. You know what I mean? And that's mentally and physically and everything. But only the fit survive.
And what sort of stuff during those periods? I mean, you touched on, you know, recovery being important. What sort of stuff did you do with those players to make sure, you're in tournament now, you're deep in tournament, to make sure that, they were ready for the next game?
Yeah. So it's all those sort of basics that we've kind of touched upon briefly so far. It's making sure that their sleep environments are good. So mattresses, pillows, the room temperature, we used to call it the cave, but dark, cold, good quality sleep environments. Making sure our schedule was conducive to recovery and rest, ensuring always an opportunity to nap in the afternoons. Um, yeah, all the recovery modalities that we could get our hands on. So we had like a framework around that took them from immediately post game, which would often look like ice baths or cryotherapy. I don't know if people were listening would have seen the cryotherapy chambers where it takes you down to sort of minus 130. But yeah, that cold therapy exposure straight away. Then you want to start thinking about more mentally giving back to your body, allowing some downtime, getting rid of the soreness, getting rid of the stiffness, and then start thinking about performance again. So it was almost like a kind of cycle of recovery modalities. Nutrition was massive. So again, I talked about it at the start. Off the back of a game, inflammation, muscle damage, all that stuff. All of the menus, supplements were revolved around like anti-inflammation. So similar to jumping in the ice bath, you want to reduce blood flow, but when you're chucking stuff down your throat, you want to make sure you're reducing inflammation. So things like going heavy on fish oils, nuts, seeds, all that stuff. So that was all built into the menus. What else? Yeah, sleep, nutrition, and recovery. Yeah, they almost become the bedrock of a tournament, really. And then making sure the wider group, if there's a minimal amount of rotation, making sure those players are still ready to compete, again, mentally and physically. Being on the bench isn't easy, but making sure they're literally ready to compete if anything goes wrong.
I guess loads of take homes for anyone listening there around, if you are going, or if you're feeling tired or you're going into a busy schedule, around the modalities, the sleep, that you need to make sure that you're prioritizing nutrition. You need to be eating, the focus on recovery in that period of time. So so you moved from, or working with the women's side, you then spent a period of time, working across the men's pathway. So working with, some of the top talents coming through at England. What, those elite players coming through, was there any kind of like, I guess, defining physical characteristics or anything that you would look for within those players? Those ones who are really high potential top players.
Physical characteristics.
Yeah. Or unless you've got other ones you want to share.
Yeah, no, yeah. I mean, we were always looking like talent ID was one of the biggest things at the lower end of the pathway. I mean, it's talent ID all the way through, right? Even at the top, to be fair. But no, yeah, speed and power. If I could define it into, yeah, probably two things: speed, two or three things: speed, power, agility. They're probably some of the most what's the word? They separate the top from the rest. But there's still ways that you can make up for that, So like if you know whether you're one of the quickest or the most agile or one of those slippery players, the player that can twist and turn, avoid getting tackled, all that sort of stuff. If you're one of them. If you're not one of them, then absolutely guys would still be making it through the pathway if their work rate was there. Actually, just thinking about it while I just sort of articulate as I'm thinking, but things like leadership qualities as well. There's guys there that were like just so good around the group, you couldn't really leave them out of the squad. So good out around the group, and you're always going to get a 7 out of 10 performance from them, and they're always going to work hard, you can often find yourself in the squad at the top level, being one of those players as well. So yeah, it's almost like not to detract or put people off if they're not the quickest and the most agile in the squad. There's still things that you can absolutely offer a team and get yourself up to the top level. I hope that kind of makes sense. But
No, definitely, and I think something that I'd have to say as well. You start looking at those top players. You realize how physically capable a lot of these players are coming through. They're obviously top talents and top players, but they are training at their clubs now. They're coming through these academy systems, and they've got really focused physical programs. So it just shows the importance of making sure that you are investing time in your strength conditioning and focusing on it if you're a young player aspiring to get to the top or maximize your abilities. Is one of those that, like you mentioned, differentiates you, I guess, between the groups. But also, you spoke about those other qualities. I think they use the terminology, what's going to get you on the plane. And I think it was highlighted around, everyone talks around how certain players are so good in the group. They're top footballers, but if you're a top footballer and the next person next to you is a top footballer, there's going to be other characteristics that can differentiate you from him. If you're doing things better, you're more professional, you're better around the group, you're a leader, you're a great communicator. Those soft skills, I think they call them, but it's going to differentiate you from the player next to you, and it's important within the game.
I've made massive, and I think again that this is almost to not detract players when they recognise they don't have certain attributes, but recognise what you do have. With the leadership piece as well, it doesn't mean that you need to be the loudest in the room. Just accept who you are, but maximise what you've got. So if you're the guy that just does everything by the book, lead by example, be a leader, but through example. You don't have to. And Messi's like an unbelievable example of that now. Like, he's the first to turn up, literally the first to turn up, the last to leave. He just come back off international duty with Argentina, and I think he landed at silly o'clock in the morning, and he was in at 7-8 o'clock and doing some recovery before then going back home. Whilst the other internationals were due to have a day off and then come in the following day. He came in and did his recovery bits and pieces and then went home, and no one expected him in the building, but he was here. So again, but at the same time, not being the loudest in the group, that's my point. Recognizing the attributes you've got and the impact it can have by just you not going through the motions, but you doing your thing, being laser focused, sticking to your task and your routine, and people recognize it and it rubs off on others. And then for the coaching staff that are going to be selecting the players, they're looking at all of this stuff. So I think it's self-awareness. As you were speaking, I was just thinking it's all about self-awareness. It's knowing what you've got, super strengths, weakness, and then just maximizing your own attributes, not trying to be something you're not.
And what a brilliant example you're able to share with us. And it's something, I put it at the bottom of the list, to keep whet everyone's appetites. Obviously, you're out there, you're working with the greatest player of all time, Messi. So, what does it look like? What does working with those top players, what can people learn from what Messi does on that day-to-day basis,
Yeah, I think he just knows his body better than I've seen anybody know their body. And I think it's probably like the way he plays the game is how well he knows his body, if that makes sense. So like he's that guy. We all know how he plays, right? It's all or nothing. He's constantly scanning, and he knows exactly where he's gonna be and where he's gonna put the ball. It's almost that off the pitch as well. Like he does. If I'm honest, he does basically completely his own routine, but it's one that's like embedded. You can see he's just executing his routine every single day, and that's even down to shaking every single person's hand when he comes into the training ground. Like you can tell he's done that forever, and it's just something he does. Same as when he drinks his certain type of tea every single morning. He sits in the same chair every morning. You know what I mean? It's like everything is like almost robotic in nature, and he has the app. And this isn't to take away from personality or anything like that at all, because he has the crack with everyone. But he is executing a routine every single day. It's just a routine. Like I said, coming off the back of an international camp, and he must have done that however many times. And I think by what I'm seeing, he's doing it off the back of every international camp. He comes to his club, he says hello to everyone, he goes through his recovery modalities, and then he shoots off home. And he's probably done that off the back of every international camp he's been at. But he's literally like, couldn't know his body any better. Is how I could describe it.
That's really really powerful, and I guess it's the combination, isn't it? It's the multiplier of everything that we're talking about here, around what it takes to be at the top, understanding your body, learning, open mindsets, developing your routine, and he's obviously a real elite example of that. But he's got to the top and he knows it. I mean, you look at other top players, Cristiano Ronaldo as well, documented how he enjoys his training, he understands his body. I think these top players, everyone always thinks Ronaldo's the one who trains really hard, and Messi's the one who's just got all the talent, but it's probably not true, is it? He works just as hard, but he does it in his way, for his body.
100%. And how he trains every day is exactly how he plays. You know what I mean? So he's training the attributes or the qualities, the vision, the decision making, all that stuff. He's training those attributes that are specific to him every single day. Like he's never randomly just doing. You're going like, what's that guy doing over there? It's never that. He's got a coach with him or two coaches with him, a couple of players, and they've set up a really specific drill. Or he's banging in those worldy free kicks constantly. Like he's found his attributes and he's training them every day. That's it. It sounds simple, but I don't think it is. But actually, no, I know it's not, because I'm trying to help some of the younger players go through goal setting processes and refine what exactly they're going to go after. So, like I said earlier, around picking one or two things, there's a bunch of lads here that I'm helping refine, and it's taken 4 or 5 sessions of like kind of goal setting to get down to, right, these are the one or two things and these are why. Because in their mind, it's like, I want to do everything. And, today I'm going to do this, today I'm going to do that. And then they get influenced or have a conversation with someone else and go on another tangent, and that's so easy to do in a big, everyone's got an opinion in football. All of your peers, the players you're around, the coaches you have contact with, your parents, whoever, everyone's got an opinion. So everyone can almost be an opportunity to derail you from focusing on what you should be focusing on. So I think that's just the biggest thing I can say is like, really give it some deep thought, go through like, what your super strengths are, what your development areas are, or where you want to get to, and what are the things that's stopping you from getting there, and what are the different physical attributes, technical attributes, mental attributes that are going to stop you, and force yourself to water it down to like one thing in each area, one mental, one mental, one technical, one tactical, and one physical. And then it's like, then create a plan around how am I going to put that into my week? Because then you'll start looking like the routine of a Ronaldo or a Messi, not like today I'm going to work on my footwork, tomorrow I'm going to work on trying to jump high for aerial duels, the next day I'm going to work on trying to use my body to defend. And it's like you're trying to catch every egg and you don't catch any. And it's not catch an egg, is it? It's catch a chicken. You're trying to catch every chicken, but you're not catching any.
That for me, that's fascinating, and you've narrowed it down really well for us there, and and say I'm the player, you've gone through that process, and I've got to the point where I know my physical quality that I really want to improve. Then how do you recommend they put that into their weekly schedule? What sort of things the players need to be making sure that they're doing?
Yeah, well, Yeah, that I suppose that unfortunately that question comes down to it depends, right? Depends what the thing is.
Say I want to say I was going to give you a really specific example. Say, I want to get faster for my runs. I'm a striker and I want to make runs in behind, and I need to get faster. You know, how often do I need to be working on those qualities? And where do I need to be working on those qualities?
Yeah, so speed. Yeah, speed's good because it's probably a common one, isn't it? That lads will be wanting to work on, lads or ladies will want to be working on. So um, there's a few different components to speed, I suppose. There's like technical proficiency. There's the physical capability to be able to run fast and repeatedly run fast. And then there's probably also like an energy system development piece there as well. As in, as you go through the game, are you able to, repeatedly sprint? It's not all out. It's not out and out speed all the time. Um, so yeah, I mean, I'd probably so if I just think about the start of a week, trying to give like a practical example, um, it might be the off the back of a Saturday game, maybe on a Monday. Um, Prior to training, I'd start integrating some speed specific drills. Um, a guy called Jonas does some really nice work. If anyone wants to look him up, he runs a company called Speedworks. He has a framework called Switch, Project, and React. So that kind of like those three things encapsulate speed training really. Switching, how quickly you can switch your limbs. So there's drills around that, like an A skip. Projection, how well you can throw your center of mass forward and continue to accelerate. And then react, like how stiff you are on the floor, how well you can react from the floor, so how quick you are off the floor. So there's a whole bunch of like speed drills around. There's speed drills you can do outside for that. There's plyometrics that will really help. So if anyone wants to sort of look up this stuff, type in speed plyometrics into Google or to YouTube and start getting some ideas and some concepts there. And then there's plyometrics that you can do in the gym as well. So on a Monday, I'd probably start thinking about more the technical drills, like I mean, I don't want to just list out a load of drills that people won't know, but a whole bunch of technical drills. So maybe give yourself 15 or 20 minutes before training to work on technical running, and potentially even on 2 days after the game, you might just do some more acceleration-based work, 10 meters, 15, 20-meter runs, towing sleds, something like that, more of like a resisted type thing on like 2 days after the game. That's also a good opportunity to work on more of the like strength qualities of speed in the gym. So that might be a good day to do those types of things. On the Tuesday or the Wednesday, I'd then start thinking about more like maximum velocity, because you're a good distance away from the game, and then you're a good distance to the next game. So you're like right in the middle of the week. So hopefully you've kind of recovered and you're ready to start thinking about going again. So when I say maximum velocity, it's opening up over 10 to 40 or 50 meters and really doing some max speed runs. Again, if you can integrate the ball, or you can integrate some positional situations there as well, that could be really cool. But yeah, don't let it detract from hitting maximum velocities. And probably on that day as well, if you were doing that inside, I'd be looking to do things more higher speed in the gym, again, like plyometrics or stuff like jump squats, loaded squat jumps, box jumps, lateral jumps, like a whole bunch of kind of jumping. I'm trying to keep this sort of simple, but give people the kind of concept. And then I probably potentially match day -2 or match day -1, again, more down the maximum velocity route. So really, it's going to start, if I was trying to simplify it, technical initially, because you're still in that kind of recovery phase. Then things that are kind of slower, more like acceleration or resisted runs or weights in the gym. And then as you get closer and closer to the game, it's going more like maximum velocity, maximum speed, fast movements, hops, bounds, all that type of stuff. I've absolutely waffled there, but hopefully that gives someone like a bit of a framework, but at least some ideas to go and like research, you know.
No, definitely, and I guess one of the most important things why you've identified that you want to get fast is that you make sure that you run fast in the week, right? You know, you need to make sure that you mentioned there um, the contextual elements of the game is really important. But ensuring that there is a moment that, you know, we talk about running above 90%, but there is a moment where you have run as fast as you can, because you're not going to get better unless you run fast. Yeah. Um, Brilliant. You know, I just wanted to, conscious of the time, and thank you for, you know, spending as much time with us to sharing all this information. Just to wrap it up, you know, if there was one thing, I'm going to just give you one thing that you would recommend a player to go out and do tomorrow to make sure they've done tomorrow or spent time on tomorrow. What would it be?
Uh, Goal setting. Goal setting to get like I said, laser focused on exactly what you're going to work on and why, and then being strict on executing against it, and not being tempted to change or evolve it too quickly. So give yourself 5 minutes, scribble on a paper, what do you want to achieve? So where do you want to get to? Like a big kind of outcome goal that could be 2, 3, 4 years away, playing for a national team or getting to a certain level in, um, getting select. It might be just getting selected regularly. It could be playing in a certain league. It could be, playing at a national team. Whatever it is, the big goal. Then think about your gaps or your limitations. What's going to stop me getting to that goal in terms of my game? So right now, what am I doing that's not going to help me get there? And then think about on the other side, what are the things that I'm really good at? From there, and then from there, prioritize, narrow it down to like one thing in each area. So technical, tactical, mental, and physical. So you end up with like kind of 4 things to work on. And if there isn't 4, that's even better. If it ends up with just 2, it's like a physical one and a mental one, or a tactical one and a technical one. That's fine as well. So you end up with 2 things, even better. And then think about the how. How am I going to put this into who do I need to go and speak to? Who can help me? Who can support me? And how am I going to put it into my week? And then you've got yourself a plan. And then the key is not to deviate from it I'd say let it stick for at least 4 weeks, 3 or 4 weeks, and smash out your plan for 3 or 4 weeks, and then review against it. Did those things get better, and how do I know they got better? So ideally on the goal setting process, you're going to say like, how do I know if I'm getting better at it? So if, for example, you want to play in the Premier League, but to play in the Premier League and you're a striker and you need to score more goals with your head because you only have kind of like one tool in the toolbox, you're only scoring goals from outside the 18-yard bangers, you're only scoring bangers, and you need to start getting inside the 6-yard box and scoring some heads and some sort of close, some dueling type goals. How are you going to do that? And when exactly are you going to work on those kind of attributes? And stick to it and review against it. So you're only going to know if you're scoring more headed goals if you're scoring more headed goals, right? It's almost like X and Y. Try, if you can, give yourself a target against those things you've written down, and then review against it. Did it get better? Yes. If so, awesome. But now I need to like evolve and review my plan and think about other things that the next thing I need to work on. Or no, like, why not? What detracted me? And do I need to continue working on that path? And what can I evolve to make sure I can fix it over the next phase, and try and work in phases and blocks. That would be my. I think that's probably my definition of like elite sport, really. If you can have that roadmap and just get focused on something, and then evolve and then review and reflect against it to see if you have improved. That's it. It's boring, but I think that's it.
And something every single person can do. Every single person listening can do it tomorrow. And I think you've given enough detail for someone to, definitely get started with it. So, let's encourage everyone to go and get out there and get started. once again, I wanted to thank our sponsors, Connection Technologies, and Ben, thanks for joining us. Thanks for sharing all of your insights. Yeah, thank you very much.
No, I've really enjoyed it. Thanks, mate.